Around 10 years ago, my family and I moved into a new house. At that time, my daughter was still very young. We had previously lived in a small townhouse which barely had any yard space. So when we moved, I was thrilled about the large yard. The neighborhood was nice, with many other homes, and our yard was nearly an acre. Most of the other properties seemed to have similar-sized yards as well. After we settled in and moved the furniture into the house, there was a lot of work I wanted to do in the yard. The grass had patches of dead spots, and there were quite a few weeds. The landscaping was minimal, so I decided to work on it. One day, shortly after moving in, I went outside to start on the yard work, while my wife stayed inside with our daughter. I worked for a few hours, then realized I needed to run to Home Depot to pick up a few supplies. The trip there and back was uneventful, and I don't remember much about it. However, when I returned, I went into the backyard, which was at the side of the house, and from there, I could see part of the street. Normally, it was a quiet residential street. Shortly after I returned, I saw an older car pull up and park between our house and the neighboring property. I didn't think much of it until I saw a man step out of the car and walk onto our property. He stood there for a while, then began walking towards me very slowly. I had met both of our neighbors and the ones across the street, but I didn't recognize this man. As he continued to approach me, I paused what I was doing and began walking toward him to see what he wanted. However, as I got closer, he turned and quickly disappeared behind a part of the house. I walked faster and arrived at the front yard, but he was nowhere to be seen. I thought maybe he had gone to knock on our door, but when I checked, no one was there. I went inside and asked my wife if anyone had come in, just to be sure. She said no, and so I went back outside. I looked all around the front yard, then checked the backyard again, but there was no sign of him. There were quite a few trees and bushes around the properties, but I didn't think he was hiding. I figured he had cut through our yard to get to the next house. The whole situation seemed odd, and the man's behavior was strange, but I didn't know what else to do, so I returned to my work. After a few more hours, I noticed the man's car was still there, and I kept working. Just as I was finishing up, I suddenly heard something behind me. When I turned around, there he was, about 50 feet away in my backyard. I called out to him, asking what he was doing there, but he didn't respond. I started walking toward him, but he quickly turned and moved away, disappearing behind some trees on the edge of the property. I walked over to check, calling out for him several times, but he never answered. Eventually, I gave up looking for him and assumed he was off my property. I went back to work, but the whole situation was unsettling. About 20 or 30 minutes later, I heard a car door slam shut. I went to the front of the house and saw the man's car drive away, which made me feel much better. After that, I finished my work for the day and had the yard looking much better. However, the next morning, when I checked outside, I was furious to see that someone had ruined most of the work I had done in the backyard. I had a strong feeling it was that same man, though I had no proof. I ended up doing most of the work again and installed security cameras around the yard. After that, the man never returned, and the mystery of what happened remained unresolved. Many years ago, when I was younger, I moved into a new apartment. The building wasn't brand new, but it was decent, and after moving in, strange things started happening right away. I can't remember if it was the first or second night, but I heard a loud knock on the door late at night around 11:00 p.m. I went to the door and looked outside, but no one was there. It was eerie. The knock was so deliberate, like someone wanted to get my attention. There were no further disturbances that night, but for the next few nights I heard loud knocking at random times during the night. It was always too late for anyone to be visiting, and I had not met any neighbors yet. One night, after hearing the knocks again, I was trying to sleep when I heard a knock, but this time it wasn't at the door. It came from the wall right next to my bed. The sound was like someone pounding the wall, just like the knocks on my door. I sat up in bed, wide awake, and I was really creeped out. The next morning, I went down the hallway to leave for work and saw that the apartment door next to mine was slightly open. I had to walk past it, but I didn't want to look inside, so I quickly kept going. When I returned home that evening, the door was closed again. The next day, I met a friendly older woman in the hallway. I introduced myself, and she mentioned she had lived in the building for almost 10 years. I asked her if she knew who lived next door to me, and she told me the apartment was vacant. That added to the mystery. She suggested I report the knocking, which I did. The management looked into it, but they never told me who was responsible. The knocking eventually stopped, and I never heard it again. When I was 10 years old, my family moved into a new house. It wasn't brand new, but it was nicer than our old one. It was in the same city, so I could still hang out with my friends. One night, I was up late playing video games in the living room. The lights were off, and only the TV was on. I heard several cars driving down the street and looked out the window. 2 SUVs slowly drove by and parked right in front of our house. A little nervous, I paused my game and watched from the window. I saw 5 or 6 men get out of the SUVs. They were all dressed in dark clothing and wearing hoodies. It was late at night, and I was concerned about their intentions. Some of the men walked toward our neighbor's house, but 2 came right up to our front door. My heart raced as I ducked down, not wanting them to see me. One of them tried to open the door, but thankfully it was locked. After what felt like an eternity, I turned on the front step light and the men immediately turned around and walked away. They got back in their vehicles and the SUVs left. The next morning, I told my parents, but they didn't seem too concerned. I never figured out what those men were doing, but the whole thing made me feel very uneasy. A few years ago, I moved into a new apartment with my roommate. My previous living situation had been awful, but this apartment was much better. One evening, I returned home to find my roommate, Jack, getting ready to go to the store. I went to my bedroom to take a shower, and while I was getting dressed, I heard someone try to open my bedroom door. I assumed it was Jack, but when I checked, he wasn't there. I texted him, and he said he was still at the store. Confused, I went back to my room to lock the door and ensure everything was okay. A little later, I heard the front door open and close, and I quickly locked it. When Jack returned, we searched the apartment, but nothing was missing. We never figured out who had been in the apartment, but we made sure to lock all the doors after that. I now live alone in a house I rent in a regular neighborhood. I moved here last year, and shortly after, something odd happened. One day, I saw a red car parked down the street. A man was sitting in the car, staring at his phone. I didn't think much of it, but a few hours later, I noticed the car was still there, and the man was taking pictures of my house. I got worried and went inside. 2 days later, the man returned. I heard loud banging on my back door late at night, followed by someone trying to open it. I didn't call the police right away, but I got the idea to play a loud alarm sound from my phone. It worked. The man stopped trying to break in and left. I called the police, and they came to investigate. They found slight damage to the door, but never caught the man. I believe it was the same man who had parked in front of my house earlier. Thankfully, nothing like this has happened since.